Before we get started, I'd like to extend a personal thank you to Misty Servia and the rest of the board. As you may have noticed, or actually maybe nobody noticed, I was not able to make the last 2 monthly meetings between work, travel, and family vacations. I wasn't able to make it. So thank you, Misty, and thank you to the rest of the board for making everything go very smoothly and very well. I also want to thank Pier 22, the Manatee Players, the Performing Arts Center for coordinating and helping us move over here for this month while Pier 22 is being renovated. We do plan on being back at Pier 22 next month, so plan on that. Also, there are some handouts on the table when you first came in. There's 2 of them regarding the Constitutional Revision Commission. There's also a copy of Professor Adkins' book, which she will talk about in a little bit, that is available. We're here today to talk about the Florida Constitution Revision Commission. It's something that I think a lot of people don't know much about. Obviously, everyone here does and knows the importance of it, but I think a lot of people don't understand what it is and how important it is to our state government. The Florida's Constitution Revision Commission meets only once every 20 years and has the power to put proposed constitutional amendments directly to a vote of the people. But how did this commission get started? Who's on it? What does the commission really do? How can a citizen present an idea to the commission? Why should Florida citizens care about the details? We're going to learn today, and as you've seen from the notices, we have for a law geek like me, a star-studded dais today. We have Professor Mary Adkins from the University of Florida, Director of Legal Writing and Appellate Advocacy. If you don't know her, you know the old saying, the person wrote the book? She literally wrote the book on the Constitution Revision Commission and the history of it. So she's going to talk about the past, different commissions in the past, and how it came about. We also have Senator Lisa Carlton, who's the co-owner of the Mabry Carlton Ranch. She's the chair of the Declaration of Rights Article 1 Committee for the Constitution Revision Committee. She's also the former president of the Florida Senate. So just a great panel talking about both the past and the present. So it's going to be a wonderful program. As we usually do, we're going to go in alphabetical order. So I'm going to invite Professor Adkins to come up and speak with us. Hopefully that's enough space. Okay,
Thank you, Matt, and thank all of you for being here. It's also appropriate that I go first because I'm speaking about the past, and Senator Carlton is speaking about the present. Why in the world does Florida have a Constitution Revision Commission that meets every 20 years when it already has a constitution? Usually, when something is invented out of whole cloth, the way Florida's Constitution Revision Commission was 50 years ago, 49 years ago, there's a reason for that. So I'm going to talk to you about how we got this Constitution and why we needed a Constitution Revision Commission by taking you back in time to the mid-1950s. In the mid-1950s, Florida was beginning to boom. Most of its population was burgeoning in central and southern Florida, but we had a constitution that was mired in the horse and buggy era. It had been passed in 1885 as a reaction to Reconstruction ending in Florida. That old constitution had a few features that really became problematic in mid-century Florida. First of all, in addition to providing for things like segregated schools that were about to become unconstitutional nationwide, it also provided for allowed a completely inconsistent court system where you had no idea what the jurisdiction of the court was that you would be in unless you knew that county's system. And the very next county over would have a completely different system. There was no home rule, which had the practical effect of that localities could only get things done by asking their legislator to pass a local bill. The legislator, which only met for 60 days every 2 years, was choked with these local bills. So it was difficult to get things done at a statewide level. Another thing that was key at the time was legislative malapportionment. When the 1885 Constitution was passed, it provided very specifically for what the apportionment should be, and it was perfectly fair according to where people lived in 1885. They all lived within 50 miles of Georgia and Alabama. So most of the districts were in those tiny counties up north, and most of the people lived in the counties south of the middle of the state, in the middle or south. There was a problem with this. It was in the Constitution, so it could only be changed by a constitutional amendment. The only way to amend the Constitution was the legislature could amend it, and there was no other way. The legislators were unmotivated to do that because they did not want to vote out their own district. I call this the turkey doesn't vote for Thanksgiving principle. So nothing was happening. Governor Leroy Collins in the late 50s tried to get the legislature to do something about it. They refused. Finally, in the early 60s, after the Baker versus Carr Supreme Court case saying that federal courts could intervene in state legislative schemes, there became a series of federal cases in Florida that started challenging apportionment. It made a few trips to the U.S. Supreme Court. By the mid-60s, there was just enough creeping bits of reapportionment happening that they got a critical mass together, and the legislature actually passed a bill in 1965 saying, okay, let's form a Constitution Revision Commission, and they can look at the Constitution, see if they want to write a new one, but they have to report back to us, the legislature. We can accept it, we can change it, or we can throw it out or ignore it like we've been doing for the past decades. So this Constitution Revision Commission, or CRC, met in 1966. Its chair was a person who was born just a little bit east of here in Arcadia and started his practice in Bartow, and then became Chesterfield Smith, famous attorney. He was coming off the Florida Bar chairmanship when he chaired the CRC. There were a few other people on this group that you may recognize their names now. There was a young senator named Reuben Askew. There was another young senator named Lawton Chiles. There was the state Democratic Party chairman who lived in Bradenton and whose name was Warren Goodrich. There was Ralph Turlington, who would become Speaker of the House and eventually Education Commissioner. And there was Dick Pettigrew, who would also become Speaker of the House a little bit later. So this group met throughout '66. They drafted a new constitution. In November of that year, something happened that hadn't happened for 90 years. A Republican got elected governor. It was Claude Kirk. Claude Kirk loved the Constitution revision. He backed it. He spent his entire transition, instead of putting together a transition team, he sat with the CRC. So in early January of '67, three things happened at once. Governor Kirk got inaugurated. In his speech, he called for a special session of the legislature to work on the new Constitution. Of course, he hadn't told anyone, and he called it for just a few days hence. So January 9th, 1967, legislators scramble into Tallahassee unprepared. They're finding their seats. They're getting ready to work on the new Constitution, which just got signed off. And at noon that day, before they could get anything done, the Supreme Court of the United States invalidated the legislative scheme, told them, you're illegal, there's nothing you can do, you have to go home. And as Ruben Askew said at the time, a motion to adjourn wasn't in order. They just said, you're null and void, you don't exist. So, special elections, new apportionment scheme, everybody gets reelected and some don't, and they come back, and it takes them 1.5 years and 4 sessions, but they do tweak, they do not ignore or throw out, because they are new faces that are fairly representative of the state. And they want a new constitution, so they pass it. They tweak it, they pass it, it goes on the 68 ballot, it passes. That new constitution had something that no state has ever had before or currently, which is an automatically recurring Constitution Revision Commission. By constitutional mandate, it springs out of nowhere 10 years after 1968 and every 20 years thereafter. It has appointees, 15 by the governor, including the chair, 9 by the House Speaker, 9 by the Senate President, 3 by the Chief Justice, and the Attorney General by automatic appointment. This group, as Matt White said, has the power to put ballots directly on the ballot, proposals directly on the ballot. So they are an awesomely powerful, and I use the word seriously, an awesomely powerful group of people. This Constitution had the CRC in it because the people who put together this Constitution felt strongly that the legislature alone did not have the people's interest in mind all the time. There needed to be other ways that the Constitution could be changed. And in fact, there are lots of them, aren't there, that we have citizens initiatives. We have this every 20 years, CRC. We now have a Tax and Budget Reform Commission that talks about money every 20 years. So briefly, let me bring you up to date between 68 and now. There have been 2 CRCs, one of them 10 years after the original one, and then one 20 years after that. So 77 and 8 and 1997 and 8. Matt has asked me to talk briefly about what those 2 groups did. The 77 group, chaired by a man named Sandy D'Alembert. He'd been a legislator. He went on to become president of FSU. He chaired a group that was mostly Democrat, because that was still the main political demographic at the time. It had former Governor Leroy Collins on it as one of his notable members. The governor was Ruben Askew by this time, of the 1968 CRC. D'Alembert's group in 78 proposed a lot of things. None of them passed. They worked for a year. They put bold things on the agenda, and the voters said no to every one of them. They were able to take a little cold comfort because eventually a lot of those things did pass. Equal rights for women in the Declaration. An explicit right to privacy passed just 2 years later. There were some other things that eventually came to be. 20 years later, which is 20 years ago, in 1997 and 8, the governor is still another 1968 CRC member, Lawton Childs. Politics are a little bit different. For the first time, both houses of the legislature have Republican heads. The governor is a Democrat. The Chief Justice leans left. So as far as appointments went, the group 20 years ago was almost perfectly evenly divided between Republican and Democrat. That was one reason, I'm going to do a spoiler here, that was one reason that they were successful. Another reason they were successful was because they had a rule, and you might think rules are boring, but rules count, and I think Senator Carlton will probably tell you that too. They made a rule that to put something on the ballot, it couldn't just be a simple majority, it had to be a 60% majority. So with an evenly divided political climate in that group, they had to get broad consensus. So they did. And they put things on the ballot, and everything they proposed except one passed. So the people on that commission, and you might recognize a few of the names. Bob Butterworth was the Attorney General. Barbara Ford Coates, next door in Sarasota County, was then and is now their tax collector. John Mills, the former House Speaker. Tony Jennings, the President of the Senate at the time. And a couple of congressmen and ABA presidents were thrown in there too. Here's what they did. They got the Equal Rights for Women passed. They did reduce the cabinet size. 20 years before, the group had tried to obliterate the cabinet. That didn't go. So reducing it worked. They got a local option for gun background checks. They got a local option for making trial judges selected by merit selection and retained by merit retention rather than elections. And they got some strong aspirational language regarding the importance of public education. So that group worked well together. I've interviewed many of the people from 1998, and every one of them, no matter their political persuasion, says that was the most respectful, positive, engaging, and generally wonderful political experience I've ever had. They did good things. Very quickly, some of the overarching things that have been consistent or inconsistent over the past 50 years leading up to Senator Carlton's talk. The appointment process has been the same every time. The Constitution provides for it. The governor appoints 15, the two legislative houses together 18, the Chief Justice, for some reason, only 3, and the Attorney General is automatically a member. How it happens is a little bit different. It's a little individualistic. Rules are, by constitutional mandate, made anew each 20 years by each CRC. And politics, do they enter in every time? Yes, they do. And if I had time, I could tell stories. But yes, every single time we've had a CRC, politics has entered into it and played some role, even if the ending has been happy. So I will be happy to answer any questions you might have after my colleague has enlightened you about what the real group is doing right now. Thank you.
And I apologize, Professor Atkins, I'm a terrible host. I did not read your bio before we got started, so let me read that real quick. Professor Mary Adkins is the Director of Legal Writing and Appellate Advocacy and a Master Legal Skills Professor at the University of Florida Levin College of Law. Professor Adkins teaches legal writing and appellate advocacy. She is faculty advisor to the Florida Moot Court team and is presented nationally and regionally on assessment methods in legal writing, the use of teaching assistants in legal writing instruction, and innovative teaching methods. She serves on national committees with the Association of Legal Writing Directors and the Legal Writing Institute. Professor Adkins has researched the history of the 1968 Florida Constitution and its revisions, and in the summer of 2016 published the book Making Modern Florida: How the Spirit of Reform Shaped a New Constitution. It's by the University Press of Florida in 2016. She's presented her Florida Constitution research at the University of South Florida, the University of Florida, Florida State University, Santa Fe College, Florida Coastal School of Law, and now the Manatee County Tiger Bay Club. She has also addressed numerous professional and community organizations. She has conducted numerous oral history interviews of Florida legal, political, and historical figures, and is the secretary of the Florida Supreme Court Historical Society. Prior to joining UF Law, Professor Adkins worked in private practice. She earned her BSJ, MA, and JD from the University of Florida. Our next speaker is Senator Lisa Carlton, who is currently the chair of the Declaration of Rights, the Article 1 Committee for the Constitution Revision Committee. Senator Lisa Carlton was appointed by Governor Rick Scott to serve on the Constitution Revision Commission. She's an 8th-generation Floridian and co-owner and manager of the Mabry Carlton Ranch Incorporated in Sarasota County. The ranch is a diverse agricultural business comprised of a cow-calf operation as well as citrus groves. Senator Carlton lives on the ranch with her husband and their 3 children, who represent the 5th generation of the family to live and work on that land. After practicing law for several years in Sarasota, Senator Carlton decided to enter the realm of public service. She spent much of her life in public service to the people of Florida, serving in the Florida legislature for 14 years. In addition to her ranch management responsibilities, Senator Carlton remains active in her community as a member of the board of directors for the Gulf Coast Community Foundation and a certified volunteer guardian ad litem. She serves on the board of directors of FCCI Insurance Group. She is also a founding member of the Florida Historic Capital Foundation. Senator Carlton received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Stetson University and a Juris Doctorate from Mercer University School of Law. Please join me in welcoming Senator Lisa Carlton.
Thank you very much. It's very good to be here, and I'm just going to make one correction, Matt. Earlier, you said that I served as president of the Florida Senate. I really let John McKay be president for 2 years. I mean, I was the president pro tem, but he technically had the title, but, you know, we can talk about that at a later time if you want, but he always tells me that I thought I was president for those 2 years, and so, sometimes maybe that was true, but most likely not. I appreciate being here. It's a pleasure to follow Dr. Adkins. She has sort of set us up really well here for you've learned about the history of the CRC and the Constitution Revision Commission and the founding nature of why Florida has a CRC. And so I'm going to highlight about 3 points and bring you up to current day speed, and then we'll get into questions, I think, as time permits. I hope we'll have time for questions. The Florida is the only state in the country that has a Constitution Revision Commission, which in and of itself is a pretty amazing statistics if you think about that, and it sort of sheds light on what Dr. Atkins was saying as far as the history and the founding of this commission and how important it was to the founders of Florida and to those early developers of our Constitution, that they would think so much of the opinions and suggestions of the public to have direct access to the ballot, which was alluded to earlier, but that was one of the points I wanted to highlight here. Direct access to the ballot. When the Florida legislature proposes constitutional amendments and vote on them in the chambers of the legislature, they then go across the street to the Supreme Court for the Supreme Court to pass judgment on. Many times through history, you can count the numbers the Supreme Court has said, no, I don't think you wrote that right, or you didn't have the words right here or there, or some sort of legal reason why that proposal does not make it to the ballot. Citizens initiatives go through a similar type review. You have to get signatures. I think it might be 1 million signatures now that citizens initiatives have to have. But even after getting all of those signatures, across the street to the Supreme Court for their blessing, if you will. Constitution Revision Commission. What the Constitution Revision Commission votes on as far as ballot initiatives directly to your November ballot. So next November, when you go to the polls, you will have, or not have, a series of initiatives proposed by the Constitution Revision Commission. So just remember that. And I think that is why it's so important that this Constitution Revision Commission, the founding of it is a group of 37 citizens that have traveled the state. We have had 2,300 people come to our public hearings. We have had over 800 people speak before our meetings, which have been going on all over the state, series of about 9 public hearings. Our goal was to come within 2 hours of every Florida citizen so that people would have the ability to travel to a meeting and present an idea or a proposal. So with the direct access comes great responsibility, and that great responsibility is grounded in us as a commission making sure that we have provided access to Florida citizens to propose ideas, to suggest changes, to ask us to look at certain provisions of the Constitution and revise, edit, amend, delete, whatever those proposals are. So we have been listening through a series of public hearings to approximately 800 people who have spoken. 20 years ago, the internet was in its infancy, virtually not existent. So in today's world, and from henceforth, the CRC is heavily relying on social media. You know, we have the CRC has a Facebook page, a website, a YouTube channel. You know, I don't even know all the names of all. I mean, I'm kind of one of the older ones on. You know, we're really talk about making modern Florida. This is, you know, making the CRC modern in today's world. So the public, if you are not able to come to one of the meetings, you can simply go on the website, suggest ideas, you know, leave proposals, things that you want to see changed or ideas that you might have. So the word of the day on CRC is really access, providing access to Florida's citizens, because this is your opportunity to change, amend, delete, modify the Florida Constitution. So we take that seriously, and the citizens of the state take it seriously, because we have had them before our public hearings, and they have earnest ideas and things that they want to see changed. The CRC is such a unique process that I wanted to speak for a moment and follow up on the political landscape of the CRC, because one of the comments that was made earlier, the CRC of today is constantly being compared to the CRC of 20 years ago. Because of the makeup of the CRC 20 years ago, it sort of has stood the test of time, if you will. And so the current day CRC, it's almost amazing that you would think this, with all the things that have happened in 20 years. You know, we've added about 5 million residents to the state of Florida. The internet, the onslaught of the internet, social media, access to the CRC is so much greater than it was 20 years ago. But at the same time, so much of the process has stayed the same. It's amazing, because really the rules that our CRC of today is operating under are the rules that were adopted 20 years ago. A few minor changes, but so that sort of, it almost emphasizes the professor's point even more dramatically, that you know, the Constitution is our founding document, and so the founding of the CRC contained within that Constitution. The process for appointment hasn't changed too much. Maybe the way you go about appointing, you know, people put applications online. I'm interested in serving on the CRC, and would apply to either the Chief Justice or the Speaker or the President of the Senate or the Governor. And so a lot of the process hasn't changed. The founding process hasn't changed, but the thing that has changed so dramatically is the ability of the citizens, of people in this room and beyond, to really propose a constitutional amendment and have it go to the ballot for vote. So that part of it has definitely changed. The political landscape of it, you know, the President of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, and the Governor are all 3 Republicans, and then the Chief Justice has 3 appointments. So, you know, I don't know what the political leanings are with the Chief Justice, but the political landscape is, well, there's, you know, 3 appointing authorities that are all 3 Republicans, and 20 years ago there was a mixture. So is this current makeup of the CRC, you know, not as politically balanced as it was 20 years ago because of that? And I would tell you that I really think the answer to that is no, because even contained within, whether it's the Democrat Party, the Republican Party, are different people of different persuasions, if you will. There are moderate Republicans, there's liberal Republicans, there's conservative Republicans, just like there are in the Democratic Party. So our mix on the CRC, as far as political leanings, if you will, I think is probably just about as balanced as it was 20 years ago. We have a process that is going to take us approximately a year. We've had 9 public hearings so far. we are about to engage in committee meetings. The process for introducing an idea for inclusion on the ballot next November is going to work a little bit like the legislative process. Again, almost mirror image of almost exactly like it was 20 years ago. We'll go through a series of committees. If you have an idea, we'll go through a series of committees. Those committees will be meeting in September, October, and November, and December. Ideas will sort of float through the committee process, be voted on, and then referred to the next committee. And then after the first of the year, we will be scheduling another series of public hearings so that we can sort of go on the road again with the ideas in hand and listen to the thoughts of Floridians across the state on what they think of those ideas. And then it will come down to next spring, full vote of the full commission in order for those ideas to actually be put on the ballot in November. So it's a legislative-like process for proposing an idea to go on the ballot, but the public hearing aspect of it is tremendously more complex and is something that occurs all over the state. So that citizens, again, will have the ability to, express opinions and suggestions. So that sort of brings us up to date with what's going on currently with the CRC, and I think that's a good spot to leave it and open it up turn it back over to you, Matt, and open it up for questions then. Thank you.
All right, we are going to open it up to questions. Remember, there's some literature as you walk out. There's a Florida Constitution Revision Commission Citizens Guide. There's some copies out there. There's also a Get Involved with the CRC handout. If they're gone when you get out there, if anybody wants to visit the website, it's flcrc.gov, flcrc.gov. And boy, this is going to be embarrassing, but yeah, if you look on the paperwork, there's a bunch of different ways for you to speak directly to the CRC. I know the Facebook sign, then there's a bird, then there's a thing that looks like a play sign where you'd push play on the old tape recorders, and a camera. So those of you who knows what those things are, you can reach out the same way and get a hold of them. If not, if you're like me, though, they have meetings where you can go and you can sit and you can present your ideas. So please make your voice heard. I know there's some great ideas in this room. I hear them all the time. So we're going to open up to questions. As you know, we limit questions to 30 seconds. I want to remind everybody, today is not a CRC meeting. I know there's some great ideas out in the room of what should be on the Constitution. However, today is questions about the CRC. So just keep that in mind. If you have some ideas for some proposals, please go to the website, go to the meetings, and share those. Today, as a special thank you to Kiwanis and Kiwanis Hall for allowing us to be here, the board voted in Kiwanis. If you're a member of Kiwanis but not a member of Tiger Bay, we'd love to have you, but please feel free to come up and ask a question. As you can see, it's a little bit different. We don't have a microphone out in the audience. What I'm going to ask is if you can come up and pose your question. Hopefully everybody can hear it. If not, I will be sure to repeat it, especially for those of you watching on the web and on METV. So it's open to questions. Rosalie? Rosalie Schaefer is a member of Tiger Bay. Thank you, Rosalie. The question for the audience is, what issues do you expect are going to come up? In addition to that is, what issues have come up in the past or in your meetings? What issues seem to be coming up quite a bit? And what issues do you foresee coming up in the future for your meetings?
I can begin answering that. We have, and I should have said this during my speak, we have currently before the commission 1,000 proposals, ideas. Of those, about 400 of them are unique, means if you take out the duplications and all of that. We have about 400 unique ideas before the commission. What will happen in order for that idea to go into a draft form of a bill and to be voted on by a committee and then the full commission, one of the 37 commissioners will have to pick up that idea and file it as their own. And so right now there are so many proposals before us. They range in everything from returning felons' rights to vote after felons have done their time, nonviolent felons have done their time, they should be automatically restored right to vote, to many issues on privacy issues, to issues on minimum wage, raising minimum wage, doing away with the right to work state in Florida. I mean, out of, 400 or 500 ideas, it runs the gamut. So what will really start happening here is in September, there is what we call a bill filing deadline. So the 37 commissioners in September will need to, and that's, again, only in about 2 weeks, will need to get the proposals that they want to sponsor into a bill drafting form to be filed in October. So by October, in about the next, 6 or 7 weeks, you will see the proposals that will then move through the CRC. And so it's a long process because we have to be done with our work by about May. So, and it's hard to do work because we have several members of the commission, unlike in previous years, which also could be pointed out, that are members of the legislature. So when the legislature is in session, it is very difficult for us to conduct business because they are all have legislative duties. So you will begin to see the proposals in about another month. But again, they run the gamut of subject matters.
Matt asked me to talk about anything that has sort of consistently come up over the last 50 years. And the ones that probably have come up the most that have actually made it to the ballot have been more governmental oriented. For instance, in '78, the group tried to abolish the elected cabinet and make the entire thing appointed. That failed. 20 years later, they did actually sort of cut some deals to reduce the cabinet to what we now have, which is an agricultural commissioner, oh gosh, I'm going to blank on this, attorney general, and the CFO. And there were 3 more cabinet positions before the 1998 group decided to cut that out. Also, the redistricting has come up or almost come up. I'm going to go backwards on this. In 1998, big controversy. The Republicans had just gotten control of the legislature. And then a former legislator who had been a Republican legislator came up with the idea, why don't we have an independent redistricting commission? Take it out of politics, make it fair. And she got some traction. She took a lot of heat from her party, but got some traction. And the whole group voted 60%. That's a great idea. Put it on the ballot. And then the legislature came back in session. And they got wind of this and lobbied very hard and very effectively and changed a couple of votes. Famously, at least in the geekdom that I live in, famously, there was one person who didn't want to change her vote, but didn't want to vote for this independent commission for whatever political pressure had been put on her. So she left the building. Chair gavels the meeting closed and waits for her to come back. She comes back. He gavels the meeting open. She leaves again. And on revote, it did not get enough votes. It lacked 2 votes to go on the ballot. So 20 years ago, we could have had independent redistricting, but it didn't make it to the ballot. 20 years before that, it went onto the ballot, completely uncontroversial, but lost. So I haven't heard anyone saying that one's coming up this time. I kind of would have expected it. Yeah, and the timing, I've in some of the interviews I've done, the timing was just wrong 20 years ago because the Republicans were saying, come on, we just got majorities. Don't take them away. But that was the timing and that was the result. Thanks.
Sandy, I'm sorry, last name? Ripberger. Is a member and would like to know about the powers and duties of the chairman of the CRC.
Yes, well, we're really fortunate in Manatee County because the chairman of the CRC is from Manatee County, Carlos Baruf. He was appointed, the chairman by Constitution is appointed by the governor. And basically, his duties as the chair of CRC were to nominate the committee chairs, or rather appoint the committee chairs. And so he has appointed the committee chairs. So I have, for instance, been appointed the Declarations Committee chair. The committees, like 20 years ago, again, we keep referring back to 20 years ago, the committee structure is essentially the same as it was 20 years ago. And it outlines, it follows the constitutional provisions. For instance, the Judicial Committee is from Article 5 in the Constitution. The Declarations Committee is from another article. The Education Committee is from another article, and I can't remember the numbers of the articles. But we follow the different sections of the Constitution, if you will, and so set up just like 20 years ago. For instance, the committee that I chaired, that Chairman Baruf appointed me to, is Declarations. It's kind of a catch-all in the Constitution. It has everything ranging from rights to privacy to, there are some other provisions in there that have to do with that perhaps the felon's rights to vote. That sort of provision is also in the Declarations section. So that is really the chairman's main role, is to appoint the committee chairs. Also, he would be obviously conducting the full commission meetings when we are in full session. Otherwise, the committee chairs will conduct their own committee meetings. I don't know, like, as far as any other duties that he has, I think that that's like his technical duties that he has. He's, he's our chairman. He, the Rules Committee sets the calendar. So other than that, he will obviously be involved in referencing committee bills or ideas to the different committees. And so other than that, just a general role of the chairman, there's not much else to say about that. I think that probably, just like all previous chairmans, he has, was definitely involved in, setting our first initial meetings and things like that. But now the committee chairs will really take over the responsibility of overseeing the process of the committee bills that will be filed.
Mr. Gibolina's question is, with the way it is set up, he's been to numerous meetings, and apparently the committee, the chairman is allowed to send it to various committees for hearings and consideration, and if it comes back amended, it needs to be sent back to another committee for more review. And if that continues to happen, what can a citizen do to get their proposal moved forward, I believe?
Well, the CRC is guided by rules that were adopted by the entire commission in a full committee meeting in Orlando. And so we do have to have an orderly process by which we hear and consider bills and ideas. And that normally begins with, if you have an idea, it will get referred to a committee, and then perhaps from that committee it might go to another committee or another committee. It just depends on the nature of the bill and how many different sections of the Florida Constitution you affect, because some things overlap, so it might need to go to one or two committees in order to have full commission, in order to have review by the appropriate committees. So I really have faith in our committee process. The rules were adopted by our commission. I have faith that we will diligently and methodically review everything before us, and there's nothing that I think indicates anything else. And so if there is an idea that you have that you would like one of the commissioners to propose and take it on as their own, I would encourage you to do that. I would also encourage you to come to the public hearings when those ideas will be considered. And I think we are, our intention is to follow the rules that were adopted by the full commission, just like, 20 years and then 20 years ago before that. So I have faith in those rules, and I think that they will provide an orderly process with thorough and complete review of all ideas.
Professor Atkins, could you address whether that type of setup has been done in the past with other CRCs?
I just briefly want to add to kind of be specific on this, that neither 20 years ago when things were so successful nor now can a committee kill a bill. It's slightly different because I believe this time a committee could let a bill go, but by vote of 10 commissioners, the proposal could revive. So there is life after death for proposals, as there has been in the past.
All right, we've got time for one more question if anybody has one. Marla Huff, Tiger Bay member and board member, which this is the time of year if anybody's interested in joining the board, we're looking for members. The question is, if a bill is not properly written, formatted, would it be considered, if it's popular, would it
Be given a chance to be tweaked and stay alive.
right, be given the opportunity for hearings and so forth, even if it's not perfectly crafted or worded?
Our rules are set up so that hopefully that won't happen, because we have what's called a style and drafting committee, which I think they had 20 years ago as well. So as the ideas sort of float through the committee process, if there's words that are off or things that don't look exactly right, before it makes its final vote before the full commission, it will go through a style and drafting committee to appropriately review, to make sure that the language is correct and proper and legal. So hopefully that won't happen. So I didn't know, on the other end of the spectrum, I think your question was actually, the professor might actually have a better response to that one, because given the history of, would an idea have more potential if it was more popular, in November? And I think that she would probably say yes to that. So since we don't know what's going to go on the ballot in November, that might be a good question when we get that final draft of all the bills, because I do think that history has said that the citizens tend to vote for things that they consider more important. And again, this is a citizens' initiative, very different than the legislature when they put things on the ballot. They are elected, they are beholden to voters, things like that. This is a group of private citizens listening to private citizens from all over the state. So it's a very different group of people than the legislature or citizens' initiatives who have a focus on one issue. So this is a unique process that I would encourage you all to participate in.
If we don't have any other questions, I did have one, if I could invoke, I'm sorry, Senator, it's to you though. You had mentioned that people can propose for the removal of parts of the Constitution. Is that, and the only reason I say that is, as some of us who are attorneys get this question, I'm sure, a lot, is why is that in the state constitution? And I did not know that part of the CRC, that a citizen can propose removing certain parts or reordering, I guess. Is that a possibility?
Well, the CRC by Constitution is set up to review the Constitution, and all the intelligent attorneys in the room would point to several provisions in the Constitution that have sort of out-of-date language, either due to U.S. Supreme Court cases or Florida cases, that particular provision is no longer valid. So there is a thought process out there that would be the job perhaps of one of the committees, like the Style and Drafting Committee, to go through and, as they say, clean up the Constitution and get verbiage out of there that is no longer, no longer necessary or perhaps even improper. And to the professor, I don't know if they did that 20 years ago. Did they do cleanup language 20 years ago? A little bit. Miscellaneous proposal. So you might look for something like that, like a miscellaneous proposal that's a cleanup of the Constitution.
All right. Again, I want to thank our speakers for coming today and joining us. Senator Carlton, Professor Adkins, thank you so much for being a part of this and sharing that information with us, both about the past and the present. I really appreciate that. As you know, we have the Tiger by the Tail Award, and our newest board member, Matt Bauer, agreed to be the decider on that one, and Sandy Rittberger for her question about the role of the chair. Got the tiger by the tail, so we'll get this to you. Thank you to the speakers. Remember, our next luncheon meeting is going to be back at Pier 22, Thursday, September 21st. Currently, we are planning on the title being Kids in Crisis. We're going to be talking about how the opioid epidemic has affected kids, right? We've talked about the problems a couple of years ago, but now we're going to talk about how is that affecting children in our community, especially the foster care system and the demands being placed on that program. Back at Pier 22, should be all fixed up. Thank you again, Misty, the rest of the board, for the last couple months of covering for me. Thank you to Pier 22 for being so accommodating and helping us set up over here. Thank you to the Manatee Players, the Performing Arts Center, for allowing us to use your facilities. Again, and I don't mean to get on a soapbox, but we all have the power when we walk into a voting booth, right? We have as much power as the richest person or the most powerful person in this country, each of us individually. This is one of those opportunities where you have the same power as everyone else to put a proposal forward to either add to the Constitution to make our state better, or, now as I've learned, to remove things potentially from the Constitution that maybe shouldn't be there. So again, follow up with the website, flcrc.gov, and then again, those whole bunch of those little symbols, all kinds of ways to get a hold of them. Our speakers are going to hang out for a few minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you for being engaged, and we'll see you next month.